Hey, welcome back to the BVB podcast. My name's Jacob, joined as always by Carver, enjoyed again by Brian. Man, how's it going? It's been a minute. It's been too long, probably. How are you?
It's going well. Glad to be back on. Always glad to talk Dortmund with you guys. But yeah, overall it's pretty good. 2025 is definitely been exciting for us in both good ways and bad ways. But I mean, hey, it is what it is. That's the life of a Dortmund fan. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. I'm doing pretty well. I did mention I was going to Florida last week, and if anyone is listening in Florida, the last week in Florida wasn't so great. I was complaining about the cold weather in St. Louis, and then went to Florida where it was like 40 and raining, which granted warmer than St. Louis, just not for Florida weather was pretty miserable. So not great, but it's better now.
I'm sorry.
Carver, how you doing?
Finishing off this extreme Dortmundy week after two very Dortmundy games. Yeah, hanging in there. Doing all right.
Yeah. Well, we've been trying to get Brian on the last maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but I think this kind of works out perfectly given what's transpired over the last week. Obviously, we had the Champions League game against Bologna. We know how that went with the going up, scoring fairly early, taking the lead on the road. Maybe things are looking positive, even if everything behind the scenes is not positive. I think we all knew what could be the outcome given that match. And I don't know how you guys were feeling, but when we were then winning, I was like, oh no, are we going to pull it? Like, I didn't know how I felt. It was really weird. Like, cause it's like, I just want you to rip the Band-Aid off. I want us to get to this point. Not that I want like the club to lose by any means, but it just feels like a change was needed, and ended up, we give up a couple goals in a minute roughly. And then, yeah, what we've all been assuming was going to happen finally happened. Nuri Sahin, plug is pulled on that project, and we move on from there. We will probably hit on some things from that match a little bit. We'll talk about Werder Bremen and now the aftermath and what looking ahead. Like, there's a lot to discuss. But Brian, since it's been a minute since we've had you on, what's been your kind of overall thoughts? You can take this as deep as you want. We haven't talked in a while, so I'm interested to hear like what you've been thinking about the season, kind of what led us to this point. Just your overall thoughts on the Sahin experiment.
Sure. And I mean, Carver and I have actually talked about this to some extent as well on this
I'm
side.
the third wheel.
Hey man, listen, group chat's always open. But we kind of like I've already kind of like gone through a little bit of like my thought process with him, but just to keep you updated since we haven't spoken in such a long time. Yeah, I mean, I was very much Shaheen in initially because I kind of said this on social media too. I was very much sold on the idea of fluid attacking football. And that's the kind of dream that we were sold when Sahin was coming in. We were told that the youth would play more of a role, which unfortunately they haven't to the degree that I would have liked. We were basically told that a lot of the things that happened under Edin Terzic wouldn't really be happening here. But at the end of the day, like, it did end up devolving into, haphazard long ball tactics. Like, it just wasn't working. And with regards to a situation with a coach like Sahin, I still firmly believe that a coach should have the time to build, the time to be able to experiment and see what works with a squad. And I think that's a problem that we've seen Dortmund have over the last few years, be that with Marco Rose being brought in after Edin Terzic initially had a good season, having him kind of in the back, waiting in the wings, to then Rose dealing with the opposite, with having Terzic kind of waiting in the wings. And then on top of that, once Terzic was in, Sahin's brought in, and now Sahin's waiting in the wings. You kind of have this thing where coaches aren't necessarily allowed to build, and they're either let go too soon or let go. It's basically, they take longer to let them go than they should. They don't find that happy medium. And I think that's been a massive problem for the club. And I mean, that's kind of contributed to where we are now. And I mean, yeah, like, once again, with regards to Sahin, like, I was very much hopeful that this would result in something positive, that we would see that more attacking, fluid football, that a lot of us, I'm sure I don't just speak for myself in terms of like the Dortmund fan base, that there are other people that also would like Dortmund to play that more attacking, fluid football. I mean, that's kind of what we saw, like high energy under Jurgen Klopp. That's when I started following the club, and that's kind of like one of the things that, made me gravitate towards the club. But seeing this sort of football in the way we've kind of devolved, like, it's clear that it's basically clear that there came a point with Sahin that it was no longer feasible or tenable to continue that project going. I personally believe that when it comes to getting rid of Sahin, it might have even been better to just do it over the winter break. even though we won against Wolfsburg, I think just looking at where we were in the table, Watzke has always said that, unless, Champions League football is in some way, shape, or form threatened, then, it will continue with the project. At that point in time, it was already threatened. And even at the time, maybe I was like, yeah, we can bounce back or whatever. But like at the end of the day, it's no longer a threat now. It's basically like more likely that we're not going to play Champions League than not. And I'm ever the optimist. I still do think we can qualify, but now it's less so in our hands. Like, yes, we could do whatever we need to do, but now other teams need to drop points. And it's not like the gap has just gotten to the point where it's not just on us now. If it was still 5 points or whatever, then yeah, you know what? That's a gap that we can overcome. 6 points, that's fine. What is it at this point? 10, 11? I'm not even sure exactly what it is, but it's a lot more than it was. And yesterday's game between Leipzig and Leverkusen didn't help us because you had Leipzig come back and each of them got a point. And then we just took a point, So we're still in a position that basically through the inactivity of the board and everything like that, this could have been avoided, and it wasn't. They kind of let it go on too long, and that's kind of where we are now.
And now it seems like it's tough for a coach to come in at like any point in the season, like to just take over. And like you said, because it's gone on so long and we're so far down the table, like it almost seems like, is there a savior coach to come in who can actually get us there? Like maybe there is the new coach bounce that could help a little bit, but yeah, it just seems so far out of reach. Like no matter what happens, it's I don't know. It's going to be an interesting second half of the season because, there's been talk of, do we get like a 6-month interim coach to see out the season and then bring in someone fully after that? Like, or is it, if you can find that, is it Tullberg for the, I don't know, maybe a month while they're doing a more extensive coaching search for the long run? Like, it's just, we're in a pretty bad position, which you don't typically find Dortmund being in. I mean, maybe you could have seen it coming with how things have been, how we've been operating and running over the last few years, but it's just like uncertain times for Dortmund, which is, I know, probably scary for the board. Like they're not happy they're here either, but there's so much craziness and chaos that's going on with them too. From our perspective, from what it seems like online, it's like, as I was talking about Bologna, it's like, no, I don't want the club to lose, but I want what's best for the club.
Right.
And now I'm like, I don't want the club as a whole to fail, but like, things are not right behind the scenes. Things are not right with the board. And it's like, it just needs to be fixed. And I don't know the solution for that. I don't know how we get there. Maybe it is like, it has to be burnt all down to the ground, but I don't know. It's rough. Cause I mean, at the end of the week, when we get to the end of the week and I just want to watch my club play football and I want to watch them win. Like I want simple things, but it's so hard to even get that. Carver, did you have anything to add?
A lot, but I'll keep it short here. The club, the board really has to face themselves here with their own accountability, and I think they've been avoiding that for quite some time with this decision to hire and then ultimately fire Nuri Sahin. It was the correct decision, even though a lot of us were wanting the project to work, of course, for a lot of reasons. The appointment to begin with, I think everyone, including the board, knew this is probably too big of a scale of a job for Nuri Sahin, as someone who's a young and experienced manager, not just because of the size of the club, but also just the state that it is currently in. You could name the club being in any sort of crisis for a few years now. And, over the last 10 years, you have managers across all levels of experience, barring maybe someone who's won a lot of titles, and they've all come across the similar underlying issues. Sahin is definitely part of the problem here, and he had his faults, but he's certainly not the only problem. And the board are now likely going to pretend that Sahin was pretty much the only thing that was keeping them from getting whatever sort of success, and they're going to look the other way now without taking accountability towards the likes of Watzke, who's still in some way involved with the club. Sommer too, of course. Yeah, it's not exclusive to him, and that's why you saw at the tifo here this weekend versus Bremen. The tifo said, addressing the elephant in the room, problems are not on the sidelines. So fans across the pond, also to the unity, are seeing the real root issues of the club here. And it's not just the head of the team or club or the coach.
Yeah, 100%. And whenever it comes to issues like this, I'm never the type of person to be like, oh, it's just on one person, because it's not. Yes, SAHIN, was an experience, and his constant fiddling with tactics wasn't productive. His choices of subs sometimes obviously very much was a little bit baffling, kind of like what we saw with Terzic at times as well. And his inability to integrate youth players in a proper fashion until, the club's on fire, everyone's injured, and then you just throw them in the deep end and you expect them to perform. That's not really how you do things. Obviously, I'm not an expert or anything, but at least that's what I would think is not how you do things, because then you're kind of just putting these young players in a position where, they're going to end up, footing the blame for something that technically they weren't even ready for in the first place, because they didn't have the coach to put them in, easier situations to kind of bed them in easier. It's like I said, it's like you're putting them in during a crisis. But on the flip side, there are basics that the players did not, go through. And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I mean, a player like Julian Brandt, who obviously all of us, at least I think from our previous conversations, we all like the guy. We think that there is talent there. But at the end of the day, if you're not doing basics right, if you're giving away the ball the way he does, if your passes aren't, connecting to where they're supposed to go, yeah, like that's problematic at the end of the day. He had a fantastic season last season, but even if you look back to seasons past, this guy, these issues have been there. His inability to thread balls in properly, his lack of awareness and giving away the ball in dangerous positions. This is not a first time thing. This season is not new. It's just been exacerbated. And maybe that is to a degree because SAHIN was the coach and he can help him develop. But these are also basic things. So it's the coach, it's the players, and then it's the board, it's Vatska and everyone else. Because yes, SAHIN he did want this position. It's kind of what he was gunning for from the beginning when he came here. It was kind of evident. But you have to look at a person like that and be like, yes, I understand you want this, but perhaps you're not ready for it yet. And we're not saying no completely, but why didn't you continue on as like an assistant coach with somebody that we bring in so you can actually like learn and, get more experience? Because that's kind of how you have to do it. You can't just jump into things like this when you're not ready for them. And I think that's exactly what happened. Like I said, I think that sort of issue isn't a one-sided thing. It's not just on SAHIN. It's not just on the players, but it's also on the board as well.
You saw a lot of those issues just in the Bologna game during the week here. You had like a big tactical shift from SAHIN. You had a lot of attackers in this lineup. But at the end of the day, the total XG was like 0.99. The majority of that coming from the penalty, of course. And then when we score that penalty, Garrissey and the players like run to SAHIN afterwards. And you think that's like the galvanizing moment. They're going to go on and, keep pressing forward, get a good win here. But then they go on to play some of the worst football you've seen Dortmund play in several years now. I mean, it's very shocking. Again, more errors too. And on the defensive side of things too, very shaky. I know Terzic was trying to stabilize our defense. There were moments of that, but overall it was not up to the standard that we should be at. And SAHIN too, I think, made that a lot worse too. It's only taking one pass, no matter the opposition, especially in this Bologna game, to get in ourselves into really exposed and dangerous positions, whether it's in behind. I know SAHIN's not at the wheel still, but like even against Bremen too, you're seeing those mistakes too of just being exposed way too easily from one pass. And it was no different from the Bologna game. And I fear this club is going to take several windows for us to actually fix those issues, not just from the defensive standpoint, but also, like you said, the basics. I think this team lacks a lot of technical ability too. Brandt should be showing a lot more quality in that area, but he's not. So, it's on both sides of the ball for sure.
It's kind of like what Jake said earlier. It's about ripping the Band-Aid off at this point. And that's why I'm kind of in the same boat, like where Jake, you were kind of talking about like, oh, I don't know how to feel about this game. Because honestly, for me at this point, them losing the game forced them into action. Like it becomes untenable. And now we can actually look forward to some sort of solution, be that, an interim coach or TULLBERG for the rest of the season. And then someone like Sepp Hoeneß, which would obviously be, my choice in that situation if we could get him. But yeah, it kind of needed to happen. And it's not necessarily about wanting the team to lose. It's about wanting accountability and a reaction. I think that's very valid.
I wanted to hit on a little bit too, before we kind of get into Werder Bremen a little bit and look ahead, like accountability, and it's on everyone. Like I've seen this sentiment a little bit online, is like separating SAHIN, the player, the BVB legend, from the coach. Cause like, yes, I've been SAHIN out for quite a while now, but in no way am I like trying to dismantle his legacy or tear that down by any means. Like I understand you from the board side wanting this BVB legend to come in and coach and succeed. We talked about it a little bit on the last week, but at the same time, like that's why it's on the board, because is he ready? Is he actually the right guy? Like, I understand you want to, like, they even talked about how emotional it was, like letting him go. And that was so tough. And they were sad about it. And it's like, yeah, I get that. But that's also shows like you're almost too emotionally invested, right? Like you're too emotionally invested in this idea of a BVB legend carrying BVB to success. Like, and that's already a problem. And then while I don't think SAHIN was ready by any means. I don't think he had the tactical wit to figure out what to get us to the level we need to be at, like, or maintain the standards that Dortmund needs to be at. But at the same time, I do think he's set up to fail a little bit too. And you see that in, like, if there's anyone thinking like, I mean, he failed because all the injuries, like, I think you have to look at like, well, why do we have all these injury problems? Like, we've had injury problems for years, and yeah, he had a ton this year. It was like flashbacks of the Marco Rosa year. But when you look at the squad build, which we've just hit on basically week after week on this show, like that's where it's at the fault of the board, right? So I don't necessarily want to SAHIN out, yes, but that's not the crux of the problem. Like there's so much more beyond that, and that's where I hope this is a big slap in the face for a lot of people, and we can move on. Like it's a weird time, but yeah, like no ill will against SAHIN. I honestly hope he can go and really grind it out as a coach and kind of build his way through the ranks. Like this was just way too big of a job for him to take. And at the same time, you're not given all the resources you might need or the backing you really need. Maybe had the emotional backing, but like that can only get you so far. And I think this is just a culmination of all that kind of collapsing. And hopefully we can just rebuild and move on from here.
There are still wounds that we're healing from Terzic even too. I mean, when it comes to his squad planning, choosing to extend Emre Can over signing Alvarez. I mean, I know Kale was wanting to get that deal done too. There was a handful of other moves there that now you're having more. I know he wasn't maybe necessarily the decision for Sula too, but you have other players constantly. This club is having so much dead weight with these players on these ridiculous wages that don't play much at all, or if they're playing like almost like actively against the club at times too. I mean, so Terzic, it goes back and forth too. It's everywhere.
The one thing I will say, because I do agree with you in terms of the dead weight, especially with a player like Emre Can, because like you look at obviously his performances and you'd expect that, because from what we've heard Kale say, or the media say about Kale, I should preface it properly, that he wants to move towards more a performance-based structure when it comes to wages and all that stuff. We don't see that necessarily with players, and I think that should be the case, especially for players like Chen. If you're going to be extending someone like him, who has had stints of where he's been decent and then goes long stretches, for example, this season of just not being helpful for the most part, yeah, like that kind of structure works. I will say though, I don't necessarily, because I understand that Sule is injured and still just recovering and all that, because I think he just came back into running training or something like that. I wouldn't necessarily consider him dead weight, especially considering the type of form that he came into the season with. I do think that overall, both his fitness, the way he just basically composed himself and the work he put in during preseason, and then how he displayed himself on the pitch, I don't think he was exceptionally bad. I think he was, quite decent actually. And I think that is an injury that definitely puts Dortmund in a spotty position, because, you're ending up in a position where basically you have Nico Schlotterbeck, Waldemar Anton, and then I believe it's Mane, who is supposed to be the fourth choice center back. And your fourth choice is basically still a kid and he's injury prone. So to your point, yeah, like it's really bad squad planning. So while I do agree that there are certain players that are 100% dead weight, I just wanted to preface that by saying I don't think he's necessarily in that category. And I think if he was fit, he would be lending himself to Dortmund being in better form. Because once he went down, if we really look at the results, I mean, they didn't really necessarily improve with giving Anton and Schlotterbeck more minutes, even though Schlotterbeck has been our best defender, barring the two innocuous red cards against Bremen in one season. When I heard that, because I had completely forgotten about the first one, I was like, that is insane. But yeah, so yeah, it goes back to the point. It's a multifaceted issue. There's a lot of moving parts here that Dortmund, really messed up as a whole, and we're kind of suffering for it now.
Since you set it up so perfectly, let's get into Werder Bremen and talk through that, because obviously SAHIN was let go a few days later. We have another match back in the Bundesliga home, which is like, that's where if you want to take away some, well, maybe we'll win. But I feel like I've even seen the sentiment, and maybe it was after this match, or I think when we were winning at one point, it might have been in our Discord chat, someone was like, oh, well, we are at home. And it's like, is that the sentiment? It's like, we're home, so if we get a good result, that's the only reason why. It's not because we're a good team. It's just because we're home, and somehow we can pull it off at home, even playing down a man. Yeah, if you, aren't fully aware who he is, Mike TULLBERG took over as interim coach for the time being. It was reported before the match, which I think also, again, we're not behind the scenes. We don't know everything that's going on. I only see the stuff I see on Twitter, but it seemed like he's definitely on the bench for this match. Don't really know what's happening for the next one. Now we see he should be also the coach for the next Champions League match again. So it's just kind of, don't know how long it's going to be, but yeah, so he steps in coming up from the U19 squad. Seeing his pedigree, like he's been the U19 squad since 2020, I believe. And then maybe coached the U23s a little bit. I was like, is it crazy to say that he has more experience than SAHIN does on an actual coaching level? Like actually being the man leading it?
It depends on how highly you rank the Turkish league, obviously. And I mean, it's debatable, right? But yeah, I mean, when it comes to TULLBERG, all right, well, let me backtrack for a moment. When it comes to the game, right? We go up 2-0, and I admittedly became the victim of hope once again. I was like, this is funny enough. We were playing better with 10 men than I'd seen us play in a very long time. And I was like, we look composed. We look like we're going to just get the job done. I wasn't nervous. And then even when the first goal goes in from Bittencourt, because of course we have to have a former Dortmund player score. What Dortmund game would it be if it wasn't, a former Dortmund player scoring on us yet again? But even when that went in, because I was actually at Banter watching with the fan club, and we were kind of like, yeah, that's a thunderbolt out of the blue. That was just like a really good shot, like a really good take. Kobel, gets close to it, but it doesn't reach it. It's fine. It is what it is. You can shut up shop. You can be fine. We didn't do that. The second goal, in my opinion, and I forget exactly who it was that the ball was threaded through. I think it was Brandt and either Sabitzer or someone else, but you basically have two midfielders in close proximity to the ball, and not a single one steps for it. It just goes right through. This wasn't, it was a good through ball, but it was something that was reachable. So for me, when I see a goal like that go in, that's upsetting. That's more indicative of the Dortmund that we're used to, the Dortmund that gives teams games, because that's what we've been doing this season. It hasn't been, all these teams have been super good that have played us. No. We've just been that bad.
Yeah,
we have literally
gifted.
Yeah, like we've gifted teams this result, and this was another instance of that. With regards to TULLBERG himself, I will say I did like his energy on the touchline. I thought that was really great to see. I really thought he was trying to galvanize both the fans and the players. So that was good to see, because I didn't see SAHIN doing a lot of that during his time here. He wasn't necessarily quiet, but it always seemed like he was more reserved and timid. And like, it didn't necessarily seem like the players were reacting to when like he would be like upset on the touchline or something like that. Meanwhile, when you saw TULLBERG get upset, they're like, oh shit, okay, like, yeah, like we gotta, we got a whole ass now. So that is good. With regards to his experience, once again, it kind of comes down to how you value SAHIN's experience. And obviously, I don't think coaching a year and a half or whatever it was in the Turkish league is enough to take over Borussia Dortmund. I think you go from someone like that, you go to Bundesliga 2, and then you maybe do like a lower tier Bundesliga team and see from there. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say now, because it kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier. It's like we don't necessarily have a good choice right now. We're kind of put in an option where we're pigeonholed into picking from coaches that in other years I don't think we would have really considered, because the ones that we would consider aren't available until the summer or are contracted with other clubs, cost, a ton of money to release them from those contracts. So yeah, I mean, it's complicated.
Yeah, the high energy, attacking minded football is definitely effective and galvanizing a team short term, but long term, I'm not sure. I saw a lot of people mentioning that online. It's like Terzic did the same thing whenever he had his initial stint as interim, right? Like during COVID, you could definitely hear that too, and actually enjoyed. That was like the best thing about all the shitty parts about like having empty stadiums, is you could hear the communication between not only the players themselves, but what the instructions are, being given from coaches. And you saw Terzic just screaming whenever he wanted those pressing moments. And you saw similar with Mike Tolberg there, definitely whenever you saw like shots of him and Rierson at times, definitely after, the first goal to him going absolutely ballistic. So, that was definitely nice to see, but I'm hoping there could be a bit more long-term, because of course that's not enough to get you where this club needs to be at the moment. But either way, I mean, I think it's not a bad move for the club to actually take their time and make an intentional decision here. That's not going to get us in the same exact issue. Again, underlying issues that are above the coach, but at the moment, you deal with what you have in front of you, and we're taking game at a time, and hopefully can land the right coach here for long term, whether it's 6 months or if we're sticking with Tolberg at the end of the season. I'm not sure, but I'm interested to see the actual full 90 minutes, hopefully, over the week in the Champions League with a full 11 squad and not being depleted early on. Also with the Mecha injury too. I mean, so you had Tolberg dealing with your primary number 6 being taken out earlier in this game and going a man down. And then you managed to score 2 goals still. And was it in the first half or first 50 or 60 minutes? That's a pretty big achievement. But even after the first goal went in for Bremen, unfortunately, I knew that feeling all too well. So I kind of knew it was coming, and I was a little fortunate feeling that we didn't actually lose that game.
They were hitting that hard on the broadcast too. And I was just, every time they mentioned it, they're like, oh, 2 years ago, Werder Bremen came back and won 3-2. And I just think of Carver's sad face in the Westfalenstadion. Let's get into a little more specifics on this match and kind of looking at Tolberg, because as you mentioned, like it's tough seeing, like you want to, if a new coach, interim coach, someone comes in, like we want to see change. We want to see some positivity. And although I think there was that, it is derailed slightly, like we mentioned with the red card and the injury, but going through the lineup, kind of pretty self-explanatory. Like, you know what you're going to get, mainly because just our squad build and who's available. But we see Kobel in goal, Rierson right back, Chan and Schlotterbeck are center back with Benzabaini. At the left back, we have Gross and Mecha for 12 minutes. The two holding positions with Adeyemi, Brandt, and Gittens and Girassi up top. And then, we see Schlotterbeck get the red card, and I think the 21st minute, and before that, Mecha comes out, which, I mean, we see later, I guess this was after the red card, but we see Gross go out to right back then. And as you say, like, when we see this, like, I want to see a reaction from the guys, right? I want to see maybe some tactical tweaks, or I want to see them some kind of tactical plan that's a little different than what we've been seeing before. And even playing a man down, as you guys mentioned, like we score, we go 2 up, and it does seem like there's already a bit more control. And maybe it is just kind of giving, I don't know if it's Tolberg just being able to communicate more clearly what he wants from the guys, and then even be able to get that message across when we're playing down a man, which I see as a really positive sign. Obviously, they fast forward and we know how the game ends. We already hit it on it. They tie. And then that first goal was kind of a banger. And then they start to get back into the game. But I kind of want to talk about those minutes before that, where we led for 60 minutes, where we scored 2 goals, being down a man, where you don't see fully what Tolberg wants to maybe put out on the pitch. And on top of that, like, he had just a few days. So what was looking ahead at the next Champions League match, and then maybe looking on from there, if Tolberg does have this position for the interim for a good amount of time, like, what was the things, Brian, I'll start with you, that you see from Tolberg early in this match, and then even being a down man, like, what are the positive signs you see from him that could be positive signs looking ahead? If any. I know it's tough given the circumstances of this match anyways, but...
No, and listen, like, I give him the benefit of the doubt because he's coming into a situation that's severely messed up. Like you said, there's so many factors that aren't in his control at this point in time, but be it squad building, now injuries, red cards, things that, like, he could have never, controlled, that are going to affect, matches going forward. Because, like you guys mentioned, the match is now out and the match has been performing as our 6. Schlotterbeck is now, banned for like 1 or 2 games? 2 games now? Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, you're down another center back, so you're going to have to, see Emre Can pair up with probably Anton again, and that no one's looking for that. So there are factors that are kind of out of his control now that are going to kind of dictate the results. Once again, when it comes to what I saw from him in this game, I did like the fact that, once again, he was very galvanizing. It seemed like that he had like them, running in full gear. He was able to organize the team to, for most of the game, at least keep Bremen out despite going down 10 men. That's a credit to both him and the players for being able to do that up until that point. I did like the fact that he tried to make some more attacking substitutions. Not all of them were as conservative as we'd seen with SAHIN and then, of course, Terzic prior to that. We did see a double change on the wings with Duranville and Bayer coming on. And granted, you know what? Maybe that didn't work out fully because I think Duranville had like a dangerous giveaway. It was intentional and there was something behind it where he was like, I want to make sure that we keep Bremen under pressure because you're putting on two players that are going to run. We've seen very much from both Bayer and Duranville that they are very energetic players and they will continue to maintain that threat level that both Jamie Gittens and Karim Adeyemi are able to maintain. So I understand the logic behind that. But once again, of course, like not perfect decision because once you go 2 up in that sort of situation, you really do think in that situation, you're going to kind of hunker down and try and hold on to the result. So maybe a little bit in terms of decision making might still be a little suspect because of the fact that he's not used to being at this level. But I can't fault him for trying that. Like even in the same breath, I have to say that I can't fault him for trying that because I understand what he was trying to do. And like that's kind of what I didn't see with SAHIN. Sometimes I didn't fully understand the subs. I didn't fully understand the logic behind certain things. We think back to the game against Real Madrid. I use this as an example a lot because this was a game that really confused me. You're up 2-0 at half against the champions of Europe. And instead of continuing to press them, which in that situation probably would have led to a better result, you put on a more defensive thing and try and shut down shop. Meanwhile, you still have 11 men. You can still bring the game to them. So for me, like I get it. I understand where that came from. And even though it didn't necessarily lead to the result that we wanted, it was a positive reaction. I can definitely attest to that being something we haven't seen as much of in the last few years when it comes to games like this. So I'm very happy to see that. And I mean, just like with any coach that comes into Dortmund, I'm not going to sit here and say, you know what, I want him to fail. I want him to do bad. He might not be my first choice for would be seeing the team out until the summer. But you know what? If he can get the team playing and steady the ship, well, I mean, we'll see more obviously with how we play in the Champions League, but I'm okay with that. And if they believe that is the responsible decision to make and they're really not confident about the other options, then maybe that is that conscious decision that Carver was talking about, where it's like, you know, you're really sitting down and looking at all the different options and what really will fit. I mean, I don't know, because like the options that we have right now to come in are, I mean, of the ones, at least for me, like Niko Kovac, even though I'm not his biggest fan, makes the most sense. He's a coach that's, you know, coached a big team like Bayern. He was successful with Frankfurt. And yeah, I mean, he could possibly steady the ship. But I really don't think that there are necessarily right answers in this situation because we're not spoiled for choice. So once again, if TULLBERG can continue to show that he can galvanize this team and continue to get them running and playing, then you know what? I mean, what do you have to lose? I mean, aside from Champions League football, which as much as I'm an optimist and I want them to qualify for that, I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm not going to bet my house on it. I'm not going to, you know, expect that at this point. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
We can't be expecting it if we're not going to get any sort of win soon. And now even at home, right? Like SAHIN did have a perfect record at home until recently. And now those results even at home are suffering here. The one thing I did scratch my head out a bit for TULLBERG, and this is like, I guess, my main takeaway outside of what you said, Brian, was just not starting with Anton. And then whenever you have Mecha coming off, instead of bringing on Anton, then even he kind of doubled down and brought on Sabitzer here. And then whenever you're looking at Bremen scoring 2 goals, and then you look at the back line, you're like, oh, we have a left back playing as your center back, and then you have a center mid playing as your center back. So that pairing is not only, I don't think, ever been tried before to my knowledge. Now you're also a demand down on top of that, so you're going to be inviting more waves of pressure. I would expect to have more of like an actual natural center half, and then as one as well that has been a captain of a team that placed above us in the Bundesliga last year. But I don't know, maybe there could have been a different idea there from TULLBERG, of course. But either way, I did find that one a bit strange, and I hope we don't continue to see something like that, just because for Chan, for obvious reasons too, but Schlotterbeck being missing too. I want a natural center half in there, please.
Yeah, I know we all have our thoughts about Chan, and I wonder with that move too, like part of me just thinks, like, granted, he is, whether we agree or disagree, whether he's fallen out of favor with anyone, like Chan is the captain, like they haven't completely stripped him of that. And I think that's maybe part of it. It's just like Chan's been better in his center back position this season. And so it's like, I don't know, just get the captain on the pitch and hope for the best. And maybe he doesn't want to ruffle too many things by coming in and not starting the captain. And I think like I haven't had many complaints as Chan as a captain. I understand like you're talking more like the repositioning and even the subbing on too.
Yeah, I forgot to mention too, like Ryerson was also playing as a left back, and then he had Gross playing as a right back. So every single player in that back line was out of position.
Yeah, I even thought maybe seeing Ryerson shift over, it's like, is that an opportunity for Couteau to come on too, which has been another point of discussion. It's like, we're not even using him at all. And it seems like maybe this is an opportunity. There's so much up in the air, but I do agree, like given the red card, maybe it is you let Chan step into midfield and you bring Anton on. I don't really know, but I do know we went on to score 2 goals. It later collapsed, and I still feel like overall we did have a decent amount of control in this game playing 2 men down. So I don't know. I'm excited to see these next couple matches just because, again, I'm excited for something positive to happen. And if he can bring a guy, like, I don't even know where I sit with Brian. You're hitting on the coaching and the coaching options. Like, do we bring in someone interim? Do we let Tullberg sit for or keep coaching for a month? And like, I don't know what's going to happen. I know like there's been speculation and news coming out every day, and you don't really know like how factual is a lot of it, because we were pretty set on Eric Ten Hag being the guy before SAHIN got fired, and now it seems like that's fallen to the wayside a little bit, and a lot of other options are popping up. But in the meantime, like I even seeing this match, like I see some positives, and it's one match in after being on the training pitch for 2 days, and I see some positive signs just from that. Like even given the result with the red card and the injury, like we've had it really bad. And so it's hard for me to even be mad in this current moment because of all the circumstances. So I'm more just excited for the next game, the Champions League match coming up, and see what we can do there and then just move on. I don't know. I don't know what to think. I'm just like, it has to get better, right?
It looks like from the reports, I guess the biggest holdup from Kovac is he's wanting an option with an additional year or even 2 after this stint. And the club, I think, is smarter than that and thinking this is not a long-term option for Kovac. And I think that's honestly pretty fair. Kovac, like as you mentioned, has mentioned bigger clubs and had moments for sure, even at Wolfsburg, which is pretty much generally maybe like not near as much as a success as other clubs for him. But I think he could be the person to, steady that ship for the next few months. But yeah, I'm with the club here. I think if he's really actually demanding to have an additional option, for that to be like the ultimatum, we might have to be looking elsewhere.
Well, so that's interesting, though, because with that option, the way I understood it was, that the club have the option to extend him. So I don't necessarily see how that ends up being a problem, because the club can just say, well, we don't want to extend you. We're going with someone else, and that's fine. But maybe that's my misunderstanding of it. Maybe it's more so like, oh, like if I like it's performance based. It's like, oh, like if I get into like whatever, then you keep me on for however long. And maybe that's not the way they want to go, because that's maybe not the brand of football that they want to play. They don't want to play Kovac ball. So, I mean, that's also a possibility. There is one shout that I've kind of become a little bit more intrigued by. And granted, I mean, this is not an easy coach by any means to get at this point in time. And shout out to Mikhail from the fan club for bringing this one up, because we had a conversation about it. Is Thomas Frank, actually, from Brentford. I mean, what he's doing with the Brentford is pretty impressive. And I think if there's a way to possibly get him out of that contract, that's a good winter signing to make, if possible. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if he has a release clause in his contract or anything like that, or like, some sort of fee that we could pay Brentford to get him out of that. But I really do like what he's doing there. The more I read up on it. And I mean, I think that is a good shout. I don't think that's someone that's been linked necessarily, but that is an option. But I do think that at the end of the day, the main option is Sebastian Hoeneß. As much as I hate seeing Stuttgart dismantled at this point, needs must. I'm sorry. Like, we got to look out for ourselves here. Sorry to our VFB Americana fans, not fans, excuse me, friends out there. But yeah, so it's like at this point, I think he's the best fit. And I think that's the person that they need to go for. Will it be easy? Obviously not, especially if Bayer Leverkusen lose Xabi Alonso. I think they'd be gunning for him as well. There's other clubs. I think Leipzig has also been linked to some degree as well. So, I mean, that's going to be tough regardless. So you might not end up having that easy option over the summer anyway. So you kind of have to really like put all those cards on the table and be like, well, what makes the most sense?
Yeah, I didn't think about Leipzig. I know Leverkusen has always been in the back of my mind for Alonso, but Leipzig have, I mean, anytime we stumbled this season, not near as much, but Leipzig have been right there with us, dropping points, and they're not even in a Champions League spot either. I think they're right there in fifth at the moment. I don't know if they're tied for fourth, but either way, that's probably got to be pretty unacceptable for their board, even with the, just the financial backing they have. Thomas Frank, great shout. I think that would be top three, if not arguably my number one. It's just, is that financially feasible? I'm not sure.
Would he want to come to Dortmund? Like, I would say, as a Dortmund fan, I hope so. Or does he just keep grinding in the Premier League? But he, like, what he's done with Brentford, not just in the Premier League, but bringing them up too. And like he's been there for years, and how he's brought them in the first season and won on opening day. I remember watching this match, and I remember it vividly because my younger brother is an Arsenal fan, and I remember texting him seeing Brentford beat Arsenal 2-0 on their first Premier League match, and just thinking like, sorry, man. It was really fun to watch, but I'm sorry. Like, what he's done with that club is incredible. And that, I feel like that's the type of manager we need, who can like long-term project build and like have a clear plan of how he wants to build and sculpt this club and get out of it what I think the club, what Borussia Dortmund and all the fans deserve. And then there's a shout to, maybe he'll just bring Shada with him too, which we've already been linked with. I didn't even think to talk on any winter transfers, but we can hit on it a little bit because after hitting these coaches. But I know there's been the most recent thing. The only thing I want to ask about, like, is Adeyemi and the links with Napoli, because I think that's such a big Carver and I don't always do too much on transfers because we don't like to get into the real just gossipy rumor stuff that it never really leads anywhere. But do you actually see, like, is there a chance Adeyemi leaves us this winter? And if that happens, like, the club's already in so much disarray, and I'm like, I already feel like we need to bring someone else in with Malen out. What if Adeyemi goes too? Where does that even leave us?
Of course there's a chance. Haven't you seen how the season has gone? Like, of course there's a chance. Is it a smart move? I mean, that'll really depend on what we do if we let him go. I do think Karim has had a good season this year. Overall, I think he's been productive, barring the injury. And I was really looking forward to this season, seeing him kind of flourish and become that, important part, because obviously the guy has received a lot of, and validly, I think, because, I mean, he hasn't been ideal throughout his entire stint at Dortmund, and he has had patches where he's been ineffective, but he's shown this season in numerous games that he has the ability to improve, and I think things would have been a bit different if he didn't get injured against that game in that game against Celtic. I think it was Celtic that we were playing where he got injured. Because that was that game where we basically completely destroyed them, like 5-0, 5-1, something like that.
7-1.
And he was, something like that. And like, he was a big catalyst in that. Like, I think he scored like 3 or 4 times in that game. So, I mean, to see him go off at that point was rough because he was really starting to pick up pace. I think he would have really gone on from there. If they do sell him, like you said, I think it's a very big disruption. I think we're already not spoiled for choice when it comes to players out on the wing. I mean, yes, we can bring in and give Cole Campbell more time. There are players that kind of can step into that, but it will really depend on like what we do with that money and what sort of fee we get. Like if, for example, we sell him and get like 60 million and bring in like a Johan Bakayoko or something like that, or bring in like a left back or something, or one of those players that can both play center back and left back, someone that'll add to our depth, then that's great. On the flip side, however, it might make more sense to kind of look at more loan players right now, just because you don't know who's going to be there in the summer. So we don't really want to be stockpiling players that necessarily won't fit whoever the incoming coach's system is. I think that's also something important to, take into account. This is not me advocating for system related players, but at the end of the day, coaches have preferences. And if you buy a guy and bring him in, and then whoever comes in is like, I don't want to use this guy, you spent a crap ton of money on him, well, what do you do? So I think when it comes to more permanent transfers, I think that's something you do once you have a permanent coach and someone who has that vision. So, I mean, at the end of the day, in short, it's really going to depend on what happens from here, because if you sell them and either you don't bring someone in or you bring in the wrong player, I mean, Kevin Shada is being linked, and it's like, it's a very similar player type. And that's kind of the type of player that I personally don't want coming to Dortmund, because it's the same issue. It's that striker winger hybrid. It's the same thing with the Rashford rumors. It's not the type of player that I think will help Dortmund, because you have a striker up front with Serhou Guirassy that, to a degree, yes, he can create himself, but he he functions really well when he's being fed. And if you have two hybrid players on the wings, like Adeyemi and Malin that we've had, or whoever else, yes, or like if like with Rashford or something like that, they're going to be looking to score too. They're not exactly creators in their own right. Granted, Adeyemi has had a little bit more of that this season. I think out of all the ones that we've mentioned, he's kind of the player that will fit that mold the most. I think he fits that mold of being able to be both that creator and attacker more than Malin did, more than any potential Rashford thing, and this Kevin Schade, signing that we're thinking about here. So once again, in short, it's really going to depend on what if we do sell him, how are we going to use that money, and if it's the best decision to make. Because at the end of the day, if it kind of just goes into nothingness and we kind of just make a bunch of nonsensical signings, then why did you take out a player that's been effective this season? It doesn't make sense to me in that situation.
Yeah, I keep seeing these reports from top tier sources saying how interested we are in Schade, and then you're seeing the asking price from Brentford being between 50 and 60, which is well above our record signing for Dembele several years ago for roughly 35. And that's the same reason why we haven't been able to cover the financials for a lot of these other rumors that we've been seeing this season either, whether it's Vega from Chelsea, another player from Chelsea too that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but
Chukwuemeka, I believe.
Yeah, Zinchenko from Arsenal too. It's a messy one, and I understand wanting to cash in here on Adeyemi personally. I mean, whenever he was initially signed, I was wanting him to be like, maybe this is delusional to think, but like a career-long Dortmund player, or at the very least, one of those really long-term players, because, he's German. You saw how much he really thrived at the club and had a lot of passion for it. But, these past few years, I've said it before, he goes in these cycles of like being pretty ineffective for a month or two, and then he picks up these red-hot form out of nowhere, and then he gets this 3, 4, 5 month long injury, and then the cycle repeats. And now he's at this point again where he's still kind of struggling to, assert himself in this team. I think the left wing position is kind of locked down for JG at this point, which is, I find, pretty surprising. At the beginning of the season, I was saying the opposite. And I was even saying like a fully fit team, I'd put Adeyemi on there. But at the moment, I'm not seeing enough from Adeyemi, even whenever, he is fighting back from an injury, of course. And JG has a lot of work to do as well. And I mentioned that last week. But either way, Duranville could be that other backup left mid, but I'm still needing to see some investment elsewhere too, because if you get rid of Adeyemi this winter, and we're sitting January 26th here, only a few more days left in the window, and like you're mentioning, Brian, we could be doing the same problems again, investing in a player that is either not going to fit the system or whatever, because all these hybrid strikers, they're for Rosa. Malin was the same way, and they haven't really found a good spot in this team several years later. So.
And just look ahead at the next couple of matches. Next weekend away at Heidenheim in the Bundesliga, but coming up in a couple of days is our last Champions League Phase 1 match against Shakhtar Donetsk. It is at home. And while we started really hot in the Champions League, given everything else going on, and we'd been in those automatic qualifying positions for the majority of the tournament, now we sit 14th in the table on 12 points. After the last Champions League match, I watched quite a bit of Champions League this week, and I was trying to process. They were going over all the scenarios and everything to try to. This table is so tight, and it's just, we can't do it on our own. Other teams are going to need to lose, but I'll just say we're sitting on 12 points. Leverkusen is in that 8th position, that cutoff point, on 13 points, so we're a point off, but there's a lot of other 12s and things in between that too. So, the best we can hope for is a win, obviously, and see where we end up. I think we'll be fine in landing. Maybe there's a chance we've probably already qualified to at least the knockout phase. But yeah, all we got to do is win and really see what happens from there. But I guess this match coming up and then the Heidenheim match on the weekend, what are you guys hoping to see? Whether it's on the sideline from a player's perspective or any players you're hoping to see get a few more minutes running out. What are you hoping to see, and what do you think we'll see coming up against in the Champions League first?
Carver, you want to take this one first?
I think the math is kind of crazy, because if we would have won that match in Bologna, we could have been 5th or 6th in the Champions League, and now we're sitting in 14th. And you look at the knockout here, Brest is right above us, but if for some reason, if it works out, can you play people in the same country in your playoffs for the Champions League? Because if so, we would be playing Bayern Munich in that playoff game.
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
Because they're right below us in the table, and I could just see somehow with the luck panning out there, us somehow drawing them. For starting out so well in the Champions League, it sucked that we kind of slowly drifted off a bit, because that would have been huge. I think Dortmund is kind of where they thrive at times in the Champions League. with these knockout games, and then they look completely uninterested in the week-to-week stuff in the Bundesliga. But yeah, this could be a great opportunity at home again against Shakhtar, a full squad here again this time. Of course, Schlotterbeck is not available, but this could be a good opportunity for us to get some 3 points, some confidence, and maybe land a spot in the automatics qualifiers. I'm not sure. I'm nervous looking at this table. It's so tight.
Schlotterbeck should be available for this game.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I'm thinking about Bundesliga. Sorry. Yeah, good catch. Yeah, fifth is Atletico with 15 points, and then you go all the way down to 18th place for Celtic, and they have 12 points. So just 3 points separate a dozen teams. It's
my request for these games is very simple. It's a reaction and to continue to try and build on some semblance of form. I mean, I understand at this point the importance of the Champions League games and for Dortmund progressing from a financial standpoint, especially if we don't necessarily get Champions League next season. But at the same time, I wonder because at the end of the day, like, I still do think that the top 4 teams will drop points and we will be able to get closer and close that gap. I mean, you look at Frankfurt, yes, they look good against us, but they did lose Marmouche. They brought in Wahi. And, maybe that will help them maintain some momentum, but I don't think necessarily it'll be the same. Leipzig obviously are also, back and forth, kind of like yo-yoing between being in top 4 and outside of it. There's also, Stuttgart that you don't know how they're going to fully perform, because at the end of the day, they had their wobbles in the beginning of the season. You don't know if that's going to happen again. For me, like, I think they just really need to look game to game and look at it as like, we really just need to get points out of every single game. And I know that sounds very simplistic, but that's kind of how you have to look at it right now, because all they can control at this point is what's in front of them in the games that they play. But I think in doing so, they could take advantage from slips. So personally, for the Champions League, putting financials aside, it's not that important to me right now, because with the team the way it is right now, I don't necessarily see us going far in it as is. Interim coach, players possibly leaving, all this stuff. And maybe that's kind of why they're thinking about that, because, they're trying to stockpile cash for maybe some sort of rebuild in the summer, in case they don't meet their goals, which, once again, it's likely that they don't, or I'm not going to say likely that they don't. It's quite plausible that they don't. So going into these matches, I want to see a reaction. I want TULLBERG or whoever it is to galvanize these guys to put in a shift every single game. And I would like to see a bit more rotation in positions where players I feel like are getting a lot of minutes, and once again, like, youth players aren't. I mean, we've seen, Nemecha's injured at this point, right? So you already have one midfielder out. Sabitzer has not been performing. Gross has been hit or miss. What is the harm of putting in a player like Kale Watson in, for example, a game against like Heidenheim, right? Like, is he really going to do worse than what we've already seen? You're encouraging and helping develop a youth player, which is something that we do need to focus on. And if we don't have the financials to bring in players in the summer the way we usually would, then that becomes even more important. And they've already said they want to do that. So take these opportunities to control the factors that you can control, and try and make the best of it, because that's all you can do at this point. There's no use in crying over spilled milk and be like, yeah, we're in a shitty position. It's like, get yourself out of it to the degree that you can and see what happens, because you don't know. Other teams might help you along the way and you end up in a better position than you thought you were. It's all about effort on their end, and that's all I want to see at this point. I don't care about style of football at this point as much as, because I'm very big on that. I always talk about stylistically, like, I want to see attacking football, all this stuff. At this point, I just want to see football being played. Half the time, I was making this joke earlier with some friends. It's like, it felt like a lot of the time when I watch Dortmund now, I feel like I'm watching the Polish Ekstraklasa. And like, that to me sometimes looks more like volleyball than football, because the ball is in the air a lot of the time more than it's on the ground. So it's like, I want more cohesion there. I don't want those like haphazard long balls, players trying to take shortcuts to get stuff done. I want intentional play. I want to see them working together, and I want to see structure. Whatever that structure looks like at this point, it doesn't matter. We just need to get to the end of the season in a good position. And that's what I want to see them building towards.
We did see I was going to mention in the Werder Bremen match, we saw Vetchen on the bench too, which I thought was encouraging. And given the result, if it was going a little better towards the end, we might have seen him come on, which I was just excited to see him back on the bench, because although he got a lot of bench time earlier in the season, it was mainly due to injuries. And I think we were all coming into the season expecting more from him. And as we mentioned really early in the pod, like, the hopes of the young guys coming up, and that has not happened at all. So, yeah, hopefully there is some of that. But as you said too, like that can all. Right now we're kind of in limbo, right? Like we can have hope, and like hopefully that we decide to use these players when we don't have a lot of options, but and then hopefully we can, when we're planning for the future with the new coach, like they value that too, because I know that's something that got me into the club too. Just, I mean, a lot of it was kind of the Pulisic time and Gio Reyna, and like him coming in and being so young and seeing him get all those valuable minutes, and then not only him but seeing all the other young players that were around him. Like that's one thing that I really gravitated towards with this club, like giving these kids these very meaningful minutes. I mean, meaningful is not even, probably doesn't even give it justice. Like when I think Bellingham just tearing up in the Champions League, being like so young, and like those kind of moments, like I love seeing that, and it's not happening when we're not letting these kids play. And that's why we get some of these kids here too, right? Because we give them those chances, but that's kind of been fading a little bit. Carver, did you have something completely different than what I was about to say? Maybe.
Actually, it's exactly what I was going to say. I was just going to touch on Vachin, and Brian, I was just emphasizing that point. It's kind of crazy to think about, which I haven't. You look at the spine of this team right now: Sabitzer, Chan, Brandt. I know Reyna hasn't gotten a lot of minutes, but even these last like 2 games, I start Vachin pretty much over all of them at the moment, honestly. I mean, you've got a lot of youth there, of course, but I think you also have a lot of other qualities: the fight, the grit, the energy he brought, and just the creativity too. I think that can really top all the performances we've been seeing from those other 3 or 4 players these past few weeks. And of course, too, playing under TULLBERG in his younger career as well. They got a little bit of synergy there, and I think why not give it a go?
Yeah, and the guy's pretty versatile as well. So, I mean, you could have him playing as an 8, potentially as a 10 if you need him to. I'm not saying play him as the 10, but he has the ability to. So you could kind of slot him in where you kind of need him to. I see him as an 8, and I think that's mainly what he's played. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, especially with, once again, the way that Sabitzer's been playing, I don't get it. I don't understand why you just don't in that situation, because it's not going to hurt you. You playing Sabitzer with him not being, and I said it hurts me to say this because I love Sabitzer. I'm a big fan of his. But if he's being ineffective, what is the merit behind playing him? His wages? I mean, I don't know. I'd rather develop for the future. And if he's not going to continue to perform, then at least you're setting yourself up in a position where if you end up seeing him leave, which I think would probably make the most sense if things continue the way they are in the summer, you have some sort of replacement there. You have someone that can come in and take some of those minutes, even if you bring another midfielder in. And you've given him the time to develop, and that'll only make him more of an asset to the team moving forward. So,
yay, another rebuild summer. Our annual rebuild.
Yay, tear it all to the ground.
Man. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap there. Shakhtar Donetsk on Wednesday, then next Saturday away at Heidenheim. And yeah, Brian, it's always so good having you on. I wish we could have you on more. Feel free to come back anytime.
You just let me know.
You and Carver text and figure it out, and I'll just be here. Let me know.
We're putting you in the group chat now. That's it. I won't hear this. I'll like, oh, you just text Carver. It's fine. Like, no, we're doing the group chat.
No, it's always awesome having you on, and we really appreciate it. I'll say it again. I think this was probably the perfect time to have you on, even though the perfect time is just week after week. Just come back anytime. But
Pleasure.
If you want to find Brian, are you still, where are you at are you still on Twitter? Because I delete it from my phone like every other day.
Yeah, I mean, I am. It's healthier for me now because I don't write for BVB Buzz right now, so I don't have to be on it like constantly as I was prior to. But yeah, I mean, you can catch me on there. I'm on Blue Sky as well. But more than anything, obviously, I want to plug our pod, Dortmund Dispatch. That's where you'll find most of my stuff now. You know, it's just us working on the pod. You know, kind of like you guys, just talking about this mess that we're seeing and trying to make the best of it. So if you want to, come along our journey also and, have some help navigating all this, even if it's just you guys trying to, have a moment to hear us vent or something. Yeah. Feel free to follow us there. Writing for GGFN as well, a little bit here and there. I do have a midfielder piece coming out probably at the end of the month. So working on that slowly, kind of just trying to wait to see what happens with the transfer window to see who I technically should even be targeting still, unless they've already signed for someone else, which one of them seems started to be going that way. So I'm very upset about that, but I digress. So yeah, you just catch me on Twitter and yeah, check out our pod as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on. Everything for Brian and Dortmund Dispatch is linked in the episode notes. And yeah, we'll be back later this week. We'll see you guys later.
Take it easy.